Thank you all for your patience. We'll come to order. I call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers on June 26, 2025. 5 managers are present. Managers Hejmati and Loftus will be observing remotely this meeting. Are there members of the public here who are here for items that are not on the agenda? Moving on, approval of the agenda. I'm going to move items 12.1 and 12.2 to the end of the meeting. With that change, is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Manager Miller moves. Is there a second? Second. Manager Maxwell, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On the consent agenda, we have approval of the June 12th board meeting minutes, approval of the check registers for the general checking account, surety checking account, and wire transfers, and 2 resolutions. 25037 is authorization to distribute the capital improvement plan for annual review and comment, and resolution 25038 is approval of the city agreement and easement for East Auburn Wetland Restoration Project. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move approval.
Manager Olson moves, seconded by Manager Sando. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I have no meetings to report on, but I'll jump ahead and no, I won't. Manager Miller, would you report on Policy and Planning Committee?
We had a very extensive report on flood predictions and preparation. Presentation that was given to all the cities and other interested parties, and it's a fascinating amount of work that's gone into this, and it's already being looked at and being modified because people are identifying other uses and more comprehensive coverage of the projections, and it's really exciting piece of work.
Thank you. Manager Olson and I attended the Minnesota Watershed Summer Tour. It was a really well-done event, informative and fun too. The projects there are so different than ours, and I always appreciate that about going to the summer tours. In this case, their primary concern was flooding, and we saw a number of projects that were all related to saving the downtown, which flooded out completely in 2002, and also fields that were flooded, farmers not able to work. So they have 2 major diversion projects around the east and west side of the city, diverting the Roseau River. One of the sort of smallish projects we saw was involved a stream through a golf course where they were doing work to cut down erosion, cut down pollutants, and keeping the water cleaner so they didn't have algae and all that. And that was big but small compared to their diversion projects. Manager Olson.
Thank you. They also had incredibly large impoundments. What they do is they turned farmland, dug it out, created lots of volume, and then when the rains come, it all heads into to the impoundments. And then over the summer, they slowly let it out down the creeks and the drains and the ditches, and it allows them to get the planting done early and things like that. But these impoundments, if you look at Lake Minnetonka, we're 14,000 acres. These are 22,000 acre impoundments, and they're just massive areas where they used to be farms, and the land was sold to through the city and the watersheds. And the thing that I found the most emotional was listening to both mayors, the current mayor and the previous mayor, who gave a presentation at the East Side diversion. He said he gets the call in 2002 that he's losing his city. Think about your guts when you get the phone call that your city is going underwater, every single building. And they went to the federal government and they brought in limited funding to begin with because they really wanted to get something that was effective, and they felt it needed time. So his frustration over those first 5 to 9 years were the 2 big steps. He said the government came in and built all these highway bridges, but they're all on flat land. He said we looked like we were crazy, building big highway overpass, these giant bridges with dirt right underneath them. And he said, it wasn't until we finally got the money to take the dirt away that we now have this gigantic holding area that goes completely around the east end of the city. And now you look at it, it's a big bridge over a big open space. But he said, he used to get teased by the mayors from the other, Bemidji and War Road. He said, you got those signs up yet telling kids not to jump off the bridge? And it's only 3 feet above the earth. So he said it took a lot of work, a lot of money, a lot of effort, but he said, our net result, 100% of our downtown is out of the floodplain. We do not have to have flood insurance, which is incredible. Literally, the flooding river comes into that bypass, goes around the town and back into the river. So they may have flooding coming in from Canada and flooding going to the Red River, but they stay high and dry now. So it's a phenomenal success story. He was proud of that. So that was a very rewarding experience.
And what did he say about when it rains today?
He has PTSD. His wife says it drives her crazy. He cannot sleep if it's raining at night. So,
But I'm really happy that we went. And the Metro turned out in great numbers. We had maybe half Metro, half not. And I think it's really important that we all, as Minnesota Watershed members, support one another, because as different as our regions and our needs are, basically it comes down to the same thing of water quality and water quantity. And I'm happy that Minnesota Watershed's pulled us together. Our next item of business is the permit number 24544, item 9 on our agenda. Ms. Couture presenting. And a comment about process. Staff will present, then we'll allow any public members who wish to speak to do so, and then we'll close the floor and the board will take up the permit. And if you wish to speak, you can come sit next to Ms. Couture, state your name and your address, and then make a statement if you wish to come forward.
It will be brief. Project will create a 5-lot subdivision. Brought before the board tonight. From nearby wetland and future requirements. Staff and the district engineer have reviewed this permit and have found it to be compliant with all MCWD rule requirements and therefore recommend permit approval. I'll start with a project overview, followed by a walkthrough of the applicable district rules and an analysis of how each rule is met. Then I will outline the public concerns, followed by a time for discussion facilitated by the board. The site is owned by a family trust, and they are proposing to create a 5-parcel subdivision in the Lake Minnetonka subwatershed in the city of Orono. The site is located on the northern side of Lake Minnetonka off of the North Arm Bay. The existing site consists of 3 parcels totaling 25.35 acres, shown here in yellow. The existing conditions were 1 single-family home and 2 outbuildings. As you can see on the right side of the slide, a channel on the North Arm Bay in Lake Minnetonka extends into the site. Currently, 3 wetlands are located on site and are part of a larger wetland complex that ultimately drains to the east to the North Arm Channel of Lake Minnetonka. And the blue arrows show the direction of drainage. So the last 2 slides show the existing condition. On this slide is the proposed site plan with the proposed 5 lot lines. The lots will be graded to include a hard-packed building pad, and then each individual lot will be sold to individual builders for the house construction. All single-family homes will fall under this permit's umbrella and will be reviewed in accordance with our rules. And now moving on to the MCWD rule analysis for the 5 applicable rules. The first applicable rule is the erosion and sediment control rule. And to comply with rule requirements, the applicant is proposing silt fences in areas down gradient of the proposed disturbance, shown here in red, as well as erosion control logs that will be added around the stormwater basins after they are constructed. Additionally, there will be inlet protection and a rock construction entrance that will be in place during construction. And at the end of construction, this site will be stabilized by turf grass seed and plant plugs. Secondly, the stormwater management rule is also applicable, and with this, the project is required to treat 1 inch over the proposed new impervious surface. So to meet this requirement, the applicant is proposing 3 stormwater basins, circled in red, with one of them being infiltration and the other 2 being filtration basins. Volume control will be achieved and rates will not increase. Bounce on down gradient water bodies will not exceed the allowable amount. Additionally, the freeboard requirement between stormwater basins and the building pads will be met through hydraulic disconnection. And just to kind of explain, hydraulic disconnection is met when there's some kind of physical constraint that does not allow water to move in a certain direction between the basin and where you're trying to disconnect. So in this case, specifically for Basin 2, which is in the very southernmost basin, there's an off-site house directly to the south of here, so to provide hydraulic disconnection between that basin and the off-site house, they'll be adding a berm and a retaining wall installed directly up gradient of the basin so water cannot overtop and go towards that off-site house. The water body crossings and structures rule is also applicable for a culvert replacement in the intermittent stream in order to access the northern part of the site. The existing conditions are 2 existing 18-inch corrugated metal pipes. And as a part of this project, the culverts will be replaced with 2 36-inch reinforced concrete pipes to be able to place a raised driveway on top and safely access the northern lot without backing up water upstream of the crossing. And in order to meet this rule, while the project will change hydraulic capacity because the culvert diameter will increase, the hydraulic capacity will be maintained and 100-year floodplain elevations will not change upstream or downstream of the culvert. Additionally, the project will not increase rise in upstream or downstream flood stages. As a part of this rule, the project will also preserve navigational capacity, wildlife passage, not promote erosion or affect bank stability or water quality, and this is the minimal impact solution for the proposed need. MCWD staff and the district engineer have reviewed all of these items and confirmed compliance. The wetland protection rule is also applicable, and wetland buffers are required on all wetlands down gradient of the proposed impervious surfaces. Wetland buffers, shown in green, will be provided around wetland 1, which is a managed 2 wetland, and wetland 2, which is a managed 1 wetland. Buffer averaging and base width reduction will be utilized for both wetland buffers in accordance with the rule. The applicant will also provide buffer monument signs to mark the wetland buffer locations. Additionally, in accordance with the Minnesota Wetland Conservation Act, an exemption was applied for and received for a small amount of wetland impacts. This exemption falls under the de minimis section of the Wetland Conservation Act rule, which is typically used for very small wetland impacts, typically associated with infrastructure. So in this case, it's like a culvert. Projects that fall under this exemption do not require replacement. So for this, there will be a total of 90 square feet of permanent wetland impacts, and these were approved underneath the Wetland Conservation Act for the culvert replacement. With this culvert replacement, there will be work within the intermittent streams floodplain. So to meet the floodplain alteration rule, the applicant is proposing more cut within the stream's floodplain, shown in green, than fill, in red, which is meeting and exceeding rule requirements. Additionally, freeboard between houses and water bodies on site will be confirmed when the single-family homes are built under the future permits and different developers. But as we said before, the building pads do meet hydraulic disconnection because of the way that they are grading and changing the slopes to raise up the building pads. And to sum up all of the rule review, all 5 applicable MCWD rules are met. I'll now move into discussing concerns that we've heard from the public. MCWD staff have been coordinating with members of the public since last November about the project and have given guidance about our process and the status of the permit review. So after sending out the public notice in late May, we engaged in an in-person meeting on June 3rd with the neighbors about the project here at the MCWD office. An Orono City Council member was present, as well as 4 residents who all live within 600 feet of the property. There were also concerns from an additional resident who was unable to attend, and those concerns were brought to the meeting. During the meeting, we discussed their concerns about drainage, negative impacts to wetlands, monitoring, and future permitting requirements. And I'll discuss each of these concerns in greater detail in the upcoming slides. So the first primary concern relates to drainage and runoff from the increase in impervious surfaces on site, as well as a concern about decreased water quality because of additional impervious. So as we discussed previously, the project is in compliance with the stormwater management rule, which requires impervious surfaces to be routed and treated. A couple of vegetated swales, shown here in yellow, will be graded to prevent impervious from directing runoff directly into the wetlands and instead route them to the stormwater basins. And as we will discuss in greater detail in the upcoming slides, there will also be erosion control in place to prevent sediment from running into these wetlands during construction. And the public also raised concerns about impacts to the on-site wetlands. The district's wetland protection rule is met, which provides the creation of wetland buffers. Through averaging, the applicant is exceeding the amount of required wetland buffer area. And additionally, it's worth noting that when the project first was discussed with the district, the applicant was proposing approximately 3,000 square feet of wetland impacts and 6,000 square feet of wetland reconfiguration. And after many discussions and guidance, the only permanent wetland impacts now with this project are just 90 square feet, which are needed for that culvert replacement, and that impact is considered de minimis underneath the Wetland Conservation Act. Residents have also raised concerns about how this site will be monitored both during and after construction to ensure that the project meets the permitted plans. So as a condition of permit issuance, financial assurance will be held while the project is ongoing to remedy any issues if needed. Additionally, MCWD staff and City of Orono staff will conduct routine inspections during construction to check erosion control measures and monitor overall alignment with the approved plans. And as a recommended condition of the permit, MCWD staff would also like to be notified at least 5 days in advance before the culvert replacement begins. Once the project is complete, we will also require that as-built surveys be submitted, of which the district's engineer will review for compliance with the permitted plans, make sure everything was built as we permitted. And for long-term maintenance, another condition of the permit is the maintenance declaration, which will be recorded with Hennepin County and will memorialize the wetland buffers, stormwater facilities, and the culvert replacement so that they are maintained in the future going forward. This will be recorded against the title of the property. Concerns have also been raised by residents regarding what exactly this permit covers and what other land use projects on the site would require additional permits and regulatory review. So with this project, each lot will be graded to contain one single-family home. However, once these lots are sold, individual homeowners or developers will need to confirm the proposed single-family home plans with MCWD prior to construction. All of the lots will fall under this umbrella permit and will be required to conform to the erosion and sediment control rule and submit plans that under the allotted hardcover amounts and also meet freeboard requirements. Additionally, there have been discussions and questions from neighbors about if lake access is feasible from lots 4 and 5, the eastern ones. And in order to access the lake, the wetlands on site would need to be crossed. So any additional paths, docks, or boardwalks will not fall underneath this permit, and additional review will be needed from the applicable regulatory agencies and potentially future permits obtained for those as well. So to summarize what I have presented tonight, the project proposes the construction of a 5-parcel subdivision from 3 existing parcels with the replacement of an existing culvert, creation of stormwater facilities and wetland buffers, and cut and fill within the stream's floodplain. The permit is being brought before the board for consideration due to concerns which were raised by nearby property owners, with those primary concerns regarding drainage direction and increased runoff, negative impact to on-site wetlands, oversight during construction, and future permitting requirements for additional work on site. We've taken into consideration these concerns and reviewed what is applicable, and have reviewed the project and found that it meets all rule requirements, and we therefore recommend approval of the permit. Thank you, President White and Board of Managers, for listening to this briefing on Permit 24-544. The applicant is present tonight, as well as members of the public who may wish to speak. With that, I'll turn it back over to President White.
Thank you, Ms. Couture. Does anyone wish to come forward and address the board? Your name and address, that's right.
My name is Randall Nord, N-O-R-D. And what else do you need?
Your address.
It's 100 Bayside Trail in Orono.
Great, go ahead.
I don't really have a problem with the development per se I want to bring up. I think I've worked with Abigail on addressing the concerns I've had over the last month or so, and she's been very responsive, so I appreciate that. And again, my concern isn't with the development per se, and you've addressed all the concerns I have in terms of drainage, talking about swales, catch basins, and silt fences during construction. So that's all good. I have no problem with that, and I think they've done a good job in addressing those issues. I have one concern left, though, and it's just the engineer in me. I'm retired. And that is Lot 4 in particular. If you look at the site plan, it's got a very long, narrow, single-path driveway up to the house, and there's a turnaround loop. Maybe you could put the drawing. And again, no problem with where the house is going. My concern is simply this: if that driveway, it's clay back there, it takes a lot of water, and clay can collapse under a lot of weight. I've even had a wall on the back of a house I built once under construction collapse after they backfilled it, washed out with the rain we had today. And my concern is heavy construction equipment going up that narrow driveway. You got to get a cement truck up there, you've got to get a backhoe up there, you probably got to get a flatbed up there with trusses, et cetera, et cetera. And unless, my concern is simply this, and I don't know if you can address it. If that driveway is not properly graded, compacted, and maybe the first coat of blacktop put on it, I'm afraid that there could be collapse and even construction equipment could cause an avalanche down into the wetland. It may not be an issue, but I'd hate it for it to be an issue. That's the only concern I have. Because if you look at the site plan, that loop up there slopes about 16 feet from where the garage is down to the end of that loop. And then the driveway has got a very narrow, right on the precipice of that slope down into the wetland below it, and that slopes down. And they've talked about silt fences during construction and the swale. That will help certainly after. But I'm just concerned if that driveway isn't properly prepared, you can have collapse up there, an avalanche, or certainly some really muddy trucks, muddy roads with trucks. Anyway, that's the only concern I have. I don't know if you can address it or not. I've talked to her about it, and it's not maybe within your purview totally. The only concern.
Thank you, Mr. Nord.
Thank you.
Would anyone else wish to speak to the board?
Could we have the engineer comment on that?
President, managers, in regards to the driveway, they are following local municipal regulations. Slope, compaction, the house. So as part of that, they have to, as the lots get developed, they'll have to test all of those components. The clay, yep, it will compact, but they are, again, outside of our purview, but the city will, as part of their building permit, have to ensure that they meet all of those requirements. So to the residents' concern, absolutely, it is a steeper slope. The city has put in, that's why it's graded the way it is to meet the city's codes as far as steepness of the slope, soil, which is included in the packet as far as. So based on those engineering properties, they're meeting the city codes. The city will be the one that will of it. President does bring up a good point. It is a steep slope. It's good to be aware of that and understand the city will be.
Thank you, Mr. Meehan. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Melissa Demise, 350 North Arm Lane. I just want to speak to James and Abigail. They've been phenomenal in terms of responsiveness and collaboration, and just like answering public questions about the development. I think, and we talked a little bit about this at the meeting, but a lot of the modeling is based on 50 years of data or something like that, however long it goes back. I think we all know that the weather patterns are changing, and just with the rainfall event that we had yesterday, I do think that we are going to see more rain events like yesterday in the future. My backyard and a neighbor's backyard were completely flooded, and the amount of additional drainage that will come from this hard surface is a concern. And so I don't think we can address it and to James's point during the discussion, we don't try to plan for future risk. A lot of it is about mitigating today's risk. And so I would just love to either hear comments about how that is being considered going forward and how that impacts Lake Minnetonka, because stuff that was going into Lake Minnetonka near our lot was not clean. And so the water impacts and the quality that you spoke to, President, at the top of the meeting in terms of Roseau and their conditions and aligned collaboration that exists across the state. I just have concerns and want it to be documented. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else like to come forward?
Mandy Little, 4620 North Arm Drive. Yes, James and Abigail have been wonderful. I have concerns. This is a developer that has never built in this area, I don't believe. And this is such an important part of the lake. It's not, it's not like Wayzata Lake Shore. It's swampy, it's muddy, and I just want to be sure that we aren't entering into something that people are going to be sorry about or is going to make a bigger problem. And I understand that everything has been met, but my feeling is sometimes just because every rule has been met, this is 25% wetland in this piece of property. And, because you can, I'm not sure that we should. That's kind of where we're at. But thank you, Abigail and James have been.
Thank you for coming forward. Anyone else?
I got a question. What kind of follow-up after the permits granted, the construction is completed, and the city is given the permits and all that, do we have on after the build?
Yeah, thank you, Manager Miller. So once the permit is issued and once it's closed out, after all the as-built are reviewed, MCOD kind of takes a step back because the project's no longer active at that time. So at that point, that's where that maintenance declaration is critical, because if the properties are sold to other owners, that maintenance declaration doesn't go away. It'll be with the properties forever going forward. And so then that requires that the things like the wetland buffers are maintained and people cannot be, putting structures in it or filling in it, because then that's where that would be considered a violation and then we would act accordingly. So that's where that kind of is cemented to the properties. Same with those stormwater basins, they have to be maintained. I can't speak to what the city would do for those, but that's kind of how we would go moving forward once everything is closed out and all complete.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Who's in charge of the maintenance? That it's going to be maintained, but is it ours or is it city or is it homeowners?
Yeah, good question, Manager Maxwell. I think, I think in the beginning it may be the developers in charge of that, but then moving forward, the individual homeowners, or there may be an homeowners association over top of it that they may be responsible for maintaining that. The applicant is here and she might have a better perspective as to what the maintenance plans are for those long-term. The district is not responsible for that.
Is 5 properties bought by one developer?
Right now, yes. There's one family trust they've subcontracted a developer to basically go through all the subdividing process with the city, and then they're going to sell the individual lots once all of this work that's shown up here is completed.
Gentleman's question about the heavy equipment driving on lot 4 to get to the property. Could he go through lot 3 or 2 or 1 to get to that, as long as we work with one developer? Is it easier instead of going through that, putting that much pressure on that slope already?
Yeah, so Manager Maxwell, the lot 4 is the one very furthest to the north, so the only way to access it is through that small driveway. You'd have to go through other properties not part of the development. I can't imagine people would really be.
That's
Yeah.
because it was a different route to get to the
Yeah,
point that
if you
we
can
gotta
kind
get
of, yes, here on the, if you see right here, this is where the driveway will be going. And if you can see, it's kind of in between these two wetlands. So there's a very narrow spot where they're just crossing a stream and not having to really impact wetlands. And so that's why that location has been chosen, and it kind of limits the access up to this lot 4.
If there are no more public comments, I'd look for a motion to approve the permit with the conditions stated.
So move.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Maxwell seconds. Any further questions or discussion? Manager Olson.
Thank you. One of the things that the watershed does is when we're challenged with issues like animal life in an area or a road placement, that type of a thing, we have limited influence or capability with that in terms of what our purpose is. However, when we want to make it clear to everybody what the flood issues are and what the water cleanliness issues are, we are very strict, and we are in pursuit of excellence every time. And one of the things I heard from the 3 people who came forward is that they appreciated her work, and they appreciated his work. And that is a indication of how serious we are about how we're committed to this not being a failure and being okay and successful. So we want to put a very high standard on how things are performed. And so we don't just sit here looking at the rules and saying they're compliant. We do care deeply about that circle near the top of the house where there's a steep hill right there. I can see the contour lines right on my screen here, and that's a steep hill. So I appreciate that. And as our engineer has indicated, it'll have to be built just like you said, so that it can take the loads. But rest assured, we take it very seriously, and we do care that nothing gets messed up or accidentally damaged. And we'll keep an eye on things as progress is made. So thank you for your concerns.
Manager Olson, anything else? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Ms. Couture. Thanks for coming.
These neighbors aren't related with all these compliments they handed out, are they?
We next have item 11.1, Resolution 25039. Mr. Whisker presenting Minnehaha Reserve work status, et cetera. Certainly.
All right, well, thank you, President White. Board of Managers, I think Sherry just mentioned, item 11.1 before the board for consideration this evening is Resolution 2539, which, if approved, would delegate authority to District Legal Counsel, specifically to terminate the contract for the Minnehaha Preserve Boardwalk, declare contractor default. It would authorize legal counsel to prepare and provide all notices to the bond issuer, Granite Ray, and then take any and all other actions that legal counsel deems necessary under the contract and the bond to protect the district's legal and financial interests. So that's the purpose of the action. I did want to let the board know the contractor JTS, represented by Jeff Smith and his colleague Jesse, are here and wish to address the board. Spoken with President White about that. And so I'll give a summary presentation for the record, much of which I think is going to be familiar to both the board and JTS, and their attorney who's also here, Mark Kemper, which Lewis might supplement if I miss anything. And then I think President White and we can invite JTS and Jeff up to address the board before you consider the resolution that's before you this evening. So just any questions about why we're here or process?
Go ahead.
Very good. So I'm going to start with a summary of the project, and I think everybody knows at this point that Preserve Boardwalk's a really critical component in our 20-year effort to build the Greenway around Minnehaha Creek, which links Hopkins and St. Louis Park, built environment and nature along the Minnehaha Creek corridor. The project that we worked with JTS to undertake was to reconstruct the wooden boardwalk around the creek, its associated viewing platforms and access point, and to rebuild on existing helical piers from the initial construction of the project. That reconstruction required JTS specifically, here's some cuts from the plan sheet, to measure and cut all timber to fit to the existing helical dimensions. Something I want to point out on the front end, given one of the deficiencies are gaps in joist length in JTS's construction. This information's in the packet right on the front page, but the project came with a $1.8 million contract price and a completion date of June 30th, 2023. So now we've talked about the defective work in the past, so I won't go deep here, I don't think, but I'm going to turn to that and just orient the board to the sequence of events, sort of starting with construction, which began in March of 2023. Construction unfolded rather rapidly. In April, a series of inspections among the city of St. Louis Park, design engineer, SRF, culminated ultimately in a May 4th joint inspection that involved JTS as well, where there's some uncovering of about 8 random locations, and it was through that range of inspections that we revealed widespread deficiencies in the construction. Subsequent to that, in the month of June, defective work notices were issued to JTS. Those ended up being supplemented towards the end of June, June 30th, based on 3 additional days of visual inspections conducted by district staff. During those June inspections, watershed staff worked to inspect all accessible boardwalk headers. They looked at joists and header connections on the south side of the creek in total. On the north side, where the boardwalk is lower profile, hard to get underneath it, they did gap analysis on the outside hangars. So the outside hangars were inspected on the northern section. All of that information was tabulated into a header-by-header assessment of defects. Those are broken into categories of defective work, and then we have a log of the frequency of defectives at each header. I don't expect you to read this. It's just sort of a visual prop to show how we've synthesized that data. In that June 30th supplemental defective work notice, JTS was advised at that time that inspections had revealed the defective work at essentially all of the visually accessible headers throughout the project. They were also advised of the contract's general conditions, specifically that they might be able to propose corrections that deviate from project specification, but they'd need to follow the process that were outlined in the GCs, the general conditions. And if they did that, they'd be responsible for the engineering fees associated with review of those alternatives, alternatives away from spec, and from the district's other costs incurred to evaluate those alternatives, which include legal analysis. And again, those are provisions outlined in the general conditions. The defective work notice itself outlined 11 categories of defective work. Everybody's familiar with those, including JTS and Mr. Kemper. In a process undertaken with district leadership that took about 12 months from June 23 to June 24, and through many meetings with JTS, MITEC, the hangar manufacturer, and SRF, our design engineer, JTS ultimately proposed that 9 of the 11 issues would be brought into conformance with plan and specification. Those are highlighted here. So really no issues with plans, substitutions, or issues with code. The other 2 areas, and I'll step through these briefly, were deficiencies where JTS was proposing alternatives to plan and specification. Those would then require design engineer sign-off, so sign-off from SRF, our design engineer, and then they would need to be integrated into our contract documents via change order so that the city building officials had a comfort level approving those alternatives as alternatives to building code. And so that was the sequence of events that we agreed on up front and sort of mapped out that city building official approval would be a very critical step to document contractor readiness and an actual legal ability to advance these alternatives in the field. Because of course, without city approval, they're not going to be permitted to move forward. So in terms of the defects, hopefully very quickly, MITEC hangars were selected by JTS under the contract requirements. They were then approved by the design engineer. One of the things that we've talked about is the bracket manufacturer, MITEC, requires maximum nailing, a maximum fastener schedule throughout the project. That didn't happen. Here's just a picture of a few of the holes filled with nails. In many instances, this is a sort of a secondary category to that. The nails weren't driven all the way in as required by spec. We have a different issue where the plans clearly require that the joist hangers to suit framing conditions and skewed hangers up to 45 degrees. And so here we've got an instance where a 90-degree hanger was used on a skewed joist. From the top, I think the picture makes it clear the issues with that type of configuration. Joist isn't properly seated in the hanger. You end up with a gap, inability to toe nail the joist and have proper fastening. Those standard hangers that we're just looking at, the JTS crew took some of those and hammered the metal nailing flanges out of shape and wrapped them around the pile caps around the outside of the joist rather than using the inverted flange hangers, which are shown in the picture on the right. The left is what was installed, right is how it's supposed to look. There hasn't really been a reason provided as to why the crew chose to just manipulate a regular hanger versus use the ones that they used on other joists. There's some issues with the helical pile blends. They weren't either properly secured with helical plates or the helical plates were installed but incorrectly. So here's again, incorrect versus correct picture. This shows another instance where hangers were physically manipulated to bend out of shape where they were in proximity or conflict with helical plates. We've seen instances where square hangers were used for skewed joists. This is the opposite of that, skewed hanger for a squared one. I think just underscoring they had the right assemblage of hangers, but chose to sort of mix and match throughout the project. Just breezed through a lot of issues with hangers. This is a picture of no hangers. And so we have some joists that were essentially toe-nailed with screws into the headers, but not seated in any hanger at all. Many of the hangers are missing the toenails. Those are those dimples on the side that's supposed to prevent the timber from lifting. And so those 9 were proposed by JTS to be brought into conformance with plans and specs and code. And then there's these other 2 situations. First category really relates to gaps, and there's some subcategories between the joist and the header. So you can see the gap highlighted here. And for this level of gap between 1/8 and 5/8 inch, they've provided computer structural simulation to show that this meets the load requirements, and so that's part of their alternatives. Those gaps are okay, is what they're proposing to the city based on structural load modeling. Gaps larger than that, MITEC, JTS worked with MITEC to propose this joist extension bracket, again, an alternative part. I'm not in the product manual. This would be a metal sleeve or bracket that goes around the joist, functionally extends it, gets through bolted, and then essentially closes that gap so that the joists are seated properly. And then gaps larger than that, shown here where it was just filled in with an off-cut piece of wood. Gaps greater than 1 1/4, they'd replace the timber. So that was proposal for the secondary category of deficiency. The other category 4, this relates to use of hangers that were just put too low. And then we've either got joists floating or they're shimmed up. You can see how they've shimmed them there with different variety of shims. And the alternative here would be steel plate shims screwed to the bottom of the joist. That essentially covers the 11 categories of defective work, 9 in conformance with plan and spec, 2 alternatives. Those alternatives are the ones that require integration through change order and sign off by City of St. Louis Park approval as alternatives to building code. So that's where we've been. I'm going to finish now with a summary of sort of process and timeline working through all that to get us to where we are today. Defective work, again, was issued June of 2023. In around June of 23, don't know the exact date, but JTS retained Mark Kemper as legal counsel. And it's our experience that the communications essentially dried up from between June to November. And there were no overt efforts made by JTS to make any proposed corrections. Between November 23 and March 24th, the board might remember I was tasked with engaging directly with JTS. I began with a face-to-face meeting I had with Jeff at our office where we really talked through how we might work through a series of steps to review the problems and propose solutions, which ultimately needed to culminate in city building official approval. Because at the time, the city was quite skeptical of alternatives. And if we don't have city building official approval, we have no ability to implement any alternatives. So that's what happened November to March. By Q2 of 2024, so last year after all of those meetings and that process that I discussed with JTS, their attorney, MyTech engineers, SRF, we felt like we'd finally had a firm grasp on how the construction defects layered together, because many of these things occur at one point of connection. They're not just isolated. And then we had the package of solutions, including the alternatives. And it was at that point that I reached out and engaged the St. Louis Park building officials directly to prepare for a meeting amongst all the parties where the city could offer their feedback on those alternatives to spec, which they'd been skeptical about in the past. As part of prepping for that meeting, JTS worked with Mark Kemper, and they did submit the package of alternatives to the city for review. That happened in August of 2024. And then all of that effort culminated in a meeting at City Hall with building official leadership. I think at the end of which Jeff clearly expressed some frustration with the process, having to bear their responsibility for the costs of the improper construction, and walked out of that meeting. I had a good conversation with Mark, who emphasized that he'd keep working with JTS towards getting into the field and doing a field test, which is the agreed upon outcome of the meeting that we had with the city, and viewed as by the city as a critical next step is testing these alternatives in the field to try and seek city approval. So after a whole series of repeated statements about how time is of the essence, and the watershed district need to move faster, and needing to get in the field test before winter season, it took JTS from September to December to plan for and schedule that field test, so another pretty healthy chunk of time. My professional judgment is the field test was poorly coordinated and communicated with St. Louis Park. There's a lot of emails from the days leading up to the field test with the city, asking questions about what the logistics are, what's the plan of attack, where are we going to start, where are the locations, that sort of thing. So again, just sort of project management and communication issues. Ultimately, we did get on site, the city, the watershed, SRF, and Mark actually joined us as well, to observe JTS's proposed construction methods, which is, I think you've been briefed on before, is to jack up sections or elevate sections of the boardwalk so that they could uncover these inverted flange hangers on the outside joists, show their condition, max nail them, as well in other instances attach those shims or attach the joist extension brackets. Jacking here, I think, shows from underneath why that's important. You can see the joists lifted out of the hangers. And those outside hangers where the flanges are folded in, they're essentially hidden. So once nailing was completed during construction, they were covered with the joists and invisible. During the field test on the very first section, this is by Creekside Park, you can see the condition that JTS left the nailing on these inverted flange hangers. On the left, there's 4 of the total holes that were nailed, 2 not even fully driven in. So part of the challenge, again, with the corrections is knowing that there's a max nailing problem, and every single one of these inverted flange hangers, 2 at every single header, or 4 on either side, are hidden right now in its finished condition. JTS and Jeff have claimed since the defects were discovered, and again through the bond conference, that they were verbally directed by district staff to not nail the outside flange, which I've highlighted here. You can see there's 4 rows of nailing the outside flange is the very outer one on the left, because they were experiencing nails protruding through the pile cap timbers, that they were spinning out and splitting the timber. It's important to note here, we still, despite requesting it, have no record that that direction was provided. It claims to have been verbal. I think from our perspective, moreover, as an experienced contractor, JTS understood that district staff had no authority under the contract to provide that direction. And in fact, I think JTS had requested clarification on, can we use larger pile caps, longer ones, to avoid this issue? That question was raised, documented, and answered in writing by the project engineer through the appropriate process. So we have earlier conversations that were appropriately documented and worked through. I think as important as that, while JTS claimed it was directed to not nail the outside flange, it's repeatedly stated, including in conference with Granite Ray, that it was directed to verbally nail all the other flanges, which are highlighted here on the same bracket. And you can see very clearly it didn't do that. And that was uncovered during the field test, which I think leaves me at least puzzled. Beyond that, I think the field test did reveal there was a viable alternative to that issue, was to pre-drill and screw those exterior flanges. That could have been an outcome if this issue is appropriately raised during construction. This could have been an alternative that would have been implemented then. These are the joist extension brackets that went in. We've talked before. They worked quite well. They closed the gap, as you can see. And we also test drove some shims, which were affixed to the underneath of the joist beams. I think the city was fairly pleased with how the install of those went. We did have other issues. I think the corrections that were installed in these sections, because the jacking operation split some railing posts, we had tear out on timbers. So some concerns with the methods of installing these alternatives that we would want addressed if we were to move forward. Some of these slides are a little bit out of sequence. This is just the max nail condition from screws. I'm showing that it was possible to put all those in without splitting the pile caps. While the joist extension bracket ultimately was installed correctly, we had issues in the field test where it was installed in the wrong orientation, which gave me some pause and some current concerns since we had shop drawings and we should understand how to put those on properly. And that's while we have some pressure behind proving that JTS is going to be capable carrying these alternatives forward to get them installed throughout the project. So that's where we were up through the field test, and that level of effort that the district had to put into running the process to facilitate those, where am I at here? Well, with the field test debrief, so we met in January of 2025 after that December field test at City Hall, and we debriefed on some of the issues that we'd experienced. We openly dialogued on all of those challenges that I just highlighted that we experienced out in the field. We then drafted up and sent field debrief notes on February 3rd, framed out how we needed an implementation plan. So that would be the next step after the field test is, these are the issues we experienced, how are those going to get addressed when JTS proposes to go through and actually implement these corrections for real through the whole project. We didn't hear anything for several weeks on that. We followed up on February 20th with the change order. So we're still waiting for the implementation plan, but we circulated the change order that would pull those alternatives into the contract documents. Again, the precursor to city approval. We just asked for a status report. Where's the implementation plan, and can you sign the change order? Between March and May is really where we got into the situation where JTS objected to the details that we saw in the implementation plan. I don't remember the exact framing, but we got some communication back that what we're asking for is too detailed and unreasonable, specifically asking for how do those alternatives get implemented without further damaging the boardwalk, and what are the logistics for properly building this. We also received a series of demands from JTS that we've covered in the past. So to bring things into summary at this moment, JTS's construction of the project's effective, doesn't conform to plan or spec. It doesn't conform to the specs of the hardware manufacturer, which JTS picked, MITEC, and it doesn't conform to city building code. We've spent approximately 24 months driving the project schedule and outlining of next steps. From my vantage, without significant leadership or proactivity from JTS, a lot of this has been under district steam and effort to keep cadence on the project, pull the city in, pressure on the field test, manage a lot of the logistics. And throughout that time, I've demonstrated we had serious chunks of time where JTS was essentially unresponsive, coming out of the meeting with the city leading up to the December field test. Within the field test itself, we've experienced demonstrable issues. We haven't seen JTS pursue the municipal approval that we agreed to at the beginning of this process through the change order. They have not followed up on developing an acceptable implementation plan that would give us confidence that these things can be installed in the field without creating more problems. So bottom line, I think we have concerns with JTS's capability and willingness to advance the solutions that are now in front of us. Beyond that, we've got a challenging financial picture. The board's familiar with the accounting, but I'll step through it briefly. We've paid 3 pay requests totaling $1.5 million. Having $247,000 left in the remaining contract price, but we have over $200,000 in set-offs due to engineering fees, legal fees, and liquidated damages, all things that are provided for explicitly in the contract, liquidated damages, engineering, and legal fees. So going into bond conference, we had conversation with the board. I think we were prepared to waive the liquidated damages, which were around $100,000. Whereas in contrast, JTS at that point had demanded that we waive all set-offs, so all accrued fees, pay the full remaining contract price, and pay an approximate additional $250,000 for them to get into the field and implement the alternatives. So with that background in bond conference, which the board helped direct and prepare legal counsel and staff for, we provided this presentation in conference, and legal counsel outlined, Chuck Holtman outlined this framework for a potential agreement, noting several things. We would need a proposed agreement from JTS by June 24th. By today, June 26th, we would need an acceptable installation plan showing how all those issues in the field test would be addressed and what would the logistics look like for the repairs and coordinating that with the city. We'd also want a signed change order so that we would see the approvals positioned for city sign-off. And another condition for us is that we'd receive the finished project for the balance of the contract price with the set-offs for engineering and legal fees and us waiving liquidated damages. In terms of where we stand right now, we do not have an agreement in accordance with the terms that we outlined. We don't have a change order. We don't have an implementation plan. There's no agreement with that's been proposed with any kind of measurable performance milestones, which was a condition for the financial concessions the board was willing to make. There's been comments made about the boardwalk remaining open and looking like other boardwalks JTS has constructed. Throughout this whole process and project leading up to this point, we've obviously been in very close consultation with SRF. I think they've made it clear there's no imminent safety risk, but as you can see from how it's put together, the structural integrity is definitely compromised for the project over time. We also have a project now, because of the way that it's been built, that's not under design warranty. It doesn't conform to building code, and accepting the work as is with a deduct on the contract price for loss in value isn't a viable alternative, because the city of St. Louis Park is not going to allow that to remain in the field in its condition because it doesn't conform to building code. So that's the whole process, and I think where we've landed is time is also of the essence, given all of the distance that we've covered, the progress that we have, and in some cases have not made. We need to move forward. And given the location of the project, which is in the creek area in the wetland, ideally needing for the work to be performed in winter, we want to be moving forward at this point. So we would have a crack at actually getting it repaired in the winter of 2025 and 2026. Obviously, I think a big piece for the board is that we're acting on behalf of the public. We're public fiduciaries, and under the terms of the bond, we do have a right to have the work complete at the JTS contract cost. So it's for those reasons that we have put the resolution forward in front of you this evening to authorize legal counsel, delegate to legal counsel the authority to terminate the contract for the project and declare the contractor default and move forward with noticing Granite Ray, the bond issuer. And with that, I'll take any questions. I'll see if Lewis has anything that he wants to supplement, and then I want to invite Jeff Smith and his colleagues up to address the board.
Thank you.
President, I think the resolution really tries.
Thank you. Go ahead. Welcome. I need to have names and addresses from each of you before you begin. Mhm.
Yep. Smith versus 76200.
I'm Jesse Demers, 220th Street.
Thank you. Go ahead.
This, basically, what we want to do is just explain the joist pile cap and joist hangers, how they were installed, how we got to where we are today. So this is a little chunk of joist, 2x10, rough sawn lumber, 3x10 for the pile cap. These are the inverted hangers that are on the end of the pile cap so that the joist is flush with the outside. So we have to use the inverted flange hangers. You know, this is regular flange, which goes on the other joists that are in the middle of the. Anyway, when we were nailing the inverted hangers, you can see there's 4 rows of nails here. I don't know if
Okay, yep.
there's only a 1/4 inch of lumber left nailing when you nail this row of nails. So when we were nailing it, we were told by both the district and us, stop nailing this row of nails, splitting pile cap. You know, you can see this pile cap here, it has no cracks. So if you want, we can put a nail in here, show you exactly what it does. If you want,
Sure, go ahead.
if you want to see that.
Maybe turn the microphone off there.
It'll be off.
Thank you.
But
I didn't catch what you said.
need an extension, I'm sorry. But, you know, we did do a field demonstration earlier in March 2024. And when we were nailing these in, it was clearly splitting. And we were directed, even at that time, doing it the way we were doing it, because it's damaging the end of the pile cap. You know, so my recommendation at the time was to get rid of these altogether and leave this pile cap, and then just spread the stringer. We had 7 feet between the outside stringers of the boardwalk. This pile cap, it really doesn't matter if it's sticking out or if it's cut at 7 feet. But allow you then to be able to nail anytime you want, really. It would have been a better option, but we were told by the district and SRF that specifically not nail this. And there is no dispute by them. So it is what they directed us to do. Not to mention, there's, you know, we pre-hung 2,500 hangers on. It didn't happen overnight. It was done throughout the entire project. The entire project got built just like that. You know, I guess it's sort of 20/20 hindsight. Left the pile cap. Not easy. Add nails on regular hangers. For us to go back, check all this up. I feel, in my opinion, we do way more damage to lumber putting nails. Witnessed at the time when we did it, why it didn't. That's all I wanted to really demonstrate.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. At this point, I'll look for a motion to adopt the resolution, then we can move to discussion.
So move.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sandos seconds. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Whisker?
Well, I just, not to get into point counterpoint, but again, to pull out some highlights from what was supposed to be a short, but turned. There is no record of that direction to not nail. We just saw a demonstration. It was great that didn't split the end of the. And when we did the field test and we lifted up the joist, we saw the other flanges weren't nailed. Those were not at risk of splitting the pile cap. There's an issue there.
Yeah.
And then we have 10 other categories of defective work throughout the project that are really substantial. Hammering brackets out of compliance, not putting the helical plates on and on and on. So I spent a lot of time with Jeff on this issue, and I appreciate his comment about hindsight being 20/20. I think that's always the case when you end up in a situation like this. But from our vantage, this isn't a single point issue of splitting the end of the pile caps. And even on that issue, the other flanges in those very brackets weren't nailed.
Yeah.
Question.
Manager Olson?
Who took apart the old boardwalk? We had to remove all
Yeah,
that.
JTS did
Okay,
demolition and
okay, so there were a lot of examples of what we accepted the first time, correct?
I think so, and I wouldn't be able to speak, Bill, exactly to the specifications, because the specifications obviously shifted from Project A to Project B.
Yeah.
Sure.
But
In terms of the hangar and
in
the
general,
excellent-
there were hangars, different hangars? Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Haney.
more robust.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Are we ready to vote? All those in favor of adopting the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution is adopted. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Mark.
Are there any board inquiries, issues, or ideas to be brought forth this evening? Mr. Whisker, then we'll look to you for the administrator's report.
Oh, I see. We're moving item 14 up ahead of.
Correct.
We put 12, 1 and 2 at the end, yes.
Well, I think the two things for the administrative report would be, we covered a lot of this during committee, but just the high water levels. I hope to put together a PowerPoint, didn't get to it, a point-by-point breakdown of water levels, but parts of the watershed yesterday with baseline conditions of being at ordinary high water for Lake Minnetonka, very little inflow from the upper watershed, and really solid paddleable base flow conditions in the creek of 150 CFS have changed substantially. We got 3.5, in some instances 4 inches of rain overnight. We got another 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch yet today, and we've seen the lake come up over 3/10 of a foot. The last time I looked, it was 929.7, so it's up above the threshold that puts it into zone 1 for maximum creek discharge and 3/10 of a foot emergency spillway with more rain in the forecast. Right now, it's expected that inflows from the upper tributaries are outpacing the dam discharge, which has been adjusted to 225, up from 150. We made a modest adjustment there because obviously creeks at capacity. We've had staff up on the corridor taking pictures. We've looked at the ResNet data, and we're essentially in similar situation to mid-June last year. We're at full creek capacity. A lot of the wetland storage around the system out, and we're getting some small nuisance flooding, backyards and low spots that are in the park. The creek peaked out at 420 CFS, which is a decent amount, about 10 CFS higher than our peak from all of last season. So we're really at a point where we're waiting for the creek to subside. We're hoping it's not raining so that the dam flow can be up with the inflow to keep moving these volumes of water from the upper watershed to the creek downstream and avoid prolonged high water conditions. So tomorrow we will be sending out, I think, another high water newsletter. In the meantime, we've done some custom reach out to Park Board, City of Edina. We had a chat with the Lake Minnetonka Conservation District today. Seems like every July 4th, we're very close to high water, which is kind of a peak. Boating day, I think we might be okay for next week, but they're very attuned to where the lake is. So I think a lot of our partners are watching weather the same way. And then the second thing is I just wanted to say thank you so much and express my deep gratitude for the 20-year celebration. Yesterday, Mark stuck around. He might appreciate this. Because of just where we are organizationally, staff decided to throw me a mock trial, accusing me of being too wordy and having excessive use of metaphors. So,
Hey, you're not the jury.
yeah. At least I'm on brand. So I just wanted to say, and then we had the committee meeting and the board said such nice things. I don't like by any appearances to the contrary. I don't like being the center of attention. I just want to work with this amazing team and get things done. But I think the reason all of those words hit home and sort of hit me in the feels is just the quality of the people at the table, the staff and the board, and obviously our advisors. We just have this incredibly talented group of blue chip leaders on the board that are very, very accomplished in their own right in all of your different disciplines. And also because of how I came into the organization. Apparently a skinnier kid, I think several
Heard
people
that,
said. Without any background, not a great student in my undergrad, and really not knowing what I was doing, and a great deal of naivety about what was and what wasn't possible. And maybe in hindsight, that was a bit of an asset. But the big thing is, despite being so inexperienced, the board's just extremely, extremely generous with its vision, its leadership. The board's given me so many opportunities. Dick gave me the credit of me taking on this problem or that problem nobody wanted. I think the board was giving me those opportunities, but then they always accompanied it with just tremendous mentorship and guidance and teaching and sense of camaraderie that we're going to give you these opportunities, but we're going to give you the tools to actually be successful. And that includes putting me in proximity with amazing resources like Lewis and Chuck and Mike Panzer and Chris Meehan, John Himley, Tom Horner, many, many, many others. So you always resourced the ideas. You stretched staff, and you did that with me from the very beginning. You gave a clear vision, you set expectations, and then you resource all the ideas to help make us successful. And that's an amazingly powerful, intoxicating, and addictive place to be, because anything is possible. You've also been just really, really supportive. I think our staff team sees this. You say it all the time in committee. I wanted to reinforce it. Incredibly supportive of building a people-oriented, people-first organization. But a huge emphasis with the board support on how we treat our people. All that's cascaded down. Clear expectations, very high expectations, but they're always resourced, and the team is always supported to achieve those standards of excellence that have really been there ever since I started in 2005. And so it's just been a lot of fun to watch the board be willing, just like they did with me, to bet on the people to do amazing things. And that's allowed me to build a leadership team with Mike and Becky and enter that space as administrator with some confidence that we had tried and true people by my side to have my back, but also pipelining all this amazing talent into the organization and showing them what's possible. So I would just say thank you again. I don't think this sounds like a retirement speech in the whole week. We even had members of the public, when they saw the award, they said, "Are you leaving?" So I'm a little bit nervous, but I would just say this has been one
You haven't
of...
given them a letter?
So I just turned 44, and I've been here 20 years. So a huge chunk of my life at the Watershed District. It's been an incredibly rewarding, fulfilling, satisfying part of my life to just work alongside the board and Lewis and Chris and all of our advisors and staff. And I think every day that you come in for a board meeting or interact with staff, you can feel the energy. It's contagious. You want to jump out of bed in the morning and rush to work because thanks for everything. I think Kaylee said I was found guilty, Mark, of being too verbose. They sentenced me to 20 more years, which I'm not. The jury's still out on that one, I think.
Thank you, James. I'd like to interpose and add thanks we have for Becky Christopher and Mark Heyman, who have been here, Mike Heyman, sorry, who've been here a long time. I should remember your name, right? And have been such a big part of the culture and the work, the way the staff wants to work and work together, and really help to bring all that together too.
And I would add in Kaylee and Jill, because we have
Yep.
5 of us that are in the decade club.
Aha.
I think Becky's near 17, Mike is 14, Jill is 12. We've got a small
Okay.
crew of us that have been here.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you to staff yesterday. Humbling. Totally nauseating.
Okay, you're welcome. That concludes your report.
Yep, I could keep going.
No, it's okay. We've heard the jury. The last items on our agenda are 12.1 and 12.2, and in anticipation of going into closed session, I would give us just a moment to shift around. It's not raining, is it? Okay,
What do you think?
not raining.
Want me to follow you?
That's okay, no.
Yeah.
Thank you, though.
Get too much glare.
Yeah. And the rain makes. All right, then, we'll start with 12.1, Mr. Sherman, land acquisition.
Thank you, President White, Board of Managers. I'm here this evening to provide an update on some land acquisition opportunities along Minnehaha Creek in St. Louis Park. And I will ask Louis to please guide us into closed session at this time for purposes of discussing the land acquisition negotiation.
Madam President, managers, we'd recommend the board go into closed session for the purpose of the development of terms for the purchase. Property concerning parcels. One is 7831 Edgebrook Drive. Second is 7837 Edgebrook Drive, both in St. Louis.
Thank you. Is there a motion? to
So
go into-
moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando seconded. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are in closed session. May I have a motion to go into open session?
So moved.
Motion, second? Second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Turning now to item 12.2, the Blake Road Restoration Redevelopment, Mr. Heyman.
Madam Chair, I believe we'll have.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
President, we recommend the board closed session. Purpose of this getting confidential litigation lawsuit.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Manager Olson, second Manager Maxwell. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are in closed session.
Thank
Do I have a
you.
Motion to go into open session.
So moved.
Second.
Manager Olson, second Manager Miller. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned.